Hello, everyone. Bienvenidos. Welcome to the session, How to Fund Your Dream Reporting Project. I see that people are starting to join. So please, as you settle in, let us know in the chat where you're joining us from today. We're so excited and honored to be part of this amazing conference, the Latino Media Summit. Thank you so much to CUNY for hosting us. Thank you to Graciela and to Natalia for inviting us. My name is Marina Walker Guevara, and I am executive editor at the Pulitzer Center. The Pulitzer Center is a nonprofit organization that raises awareness about underreported issues globally. And we do that through reporting grants, that's what we're going to talk about today, but also through education and public outreach. I am going to switch briefly to Spanish for those of you who are joining and would like to know about our translation options in today's session. Si desean escuchar esta presentación en español, lo que tienen que hacer es ir a la pestaña Traducción o Translation a la derecha de la pantalla. Luego hacen clic en el botón Mute All y finalmente seleccionan el idioma español en la lista desplegable. Y ahí automáticamente entonces empiezan a recibir la traducción simultánea al español porque esta sesión va a ser en inglés. Si necesita cualquier ayuda, nos pueden dejar su consulta en el chat y el equipo de producción les va a brindar asistencia. Y de nuevo, si recién se están uniendo, por favor, déjennos saber desde dónde es que están conectándose. So the goal of the conversation today is to demystify the process of seeking financial support for your reporting projects and to give you practical tips on how to put together a successful application. Entonces, derribar muros y derribar mitos para poder financiar y llevar a cabo los proyectos periodísticos que siempre soñamos. Earlier in my career, when I was a master's student from Argentina at the Missouri School of Journalism, a reporting grant made a huge difference in my career. It allowed me to pursue an ambitious story that required reporting both in Peru and in the US. And that experience and that reporting grant and that story opened the doors to what was my first job in the US at the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, where I spent the following 15 years of my career. Now I work at the Pulitzer Center, where my job is to support great enterprise reporting projects anywhere in the world. So it's kind of full circle for me, and I would love to be able to support your great and ambitious story ideas. So with me today to talk about grants, pitches, and reporting projects are two amazing journalists and Pulitzer Center grantees, Almudena Toral and Muriel Alarcón. So hello, Almudena and Muriel. Almudena is executive producer for video at ProPublica. Before, she led the feature video team at Univision Digital, and among many other things, she taught video storytelling at CUNY. Muriel Alarcón is a journalist from Chile, currently freelancing in New York City, and is also a reporter at Columbia University's Global Migration Project. Before moving to New York for her master's at Columbia, she worked for several magazines in Chile. So why don't we go ahead and get started? What I will do is I will ask Almudena and Muriel a few questions about the projects that they did with support from the Pulitzer Center. And then I will offer a few tips of how to apply for our reporting grants, and what are some things to keep in mind to get a successful application. And then we will open up to questions. So please don't be shy and get your questions coming on the chat. We are eager to have a conversation with you. So Almudena, to get started with you, if that's okay. So you and Patricia Clarenbaugh, your colleague, were together in Univision when you decided to pursue a multimedia story focused on the alarming rise in suicides among young women in El Salvador, often triggered by intense situations of violence that they had experienced. Tell us a little bit how that story came about and what you found in your reporting.
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here, and thank you, Marina, and the Latino Media Summit. The story that we did with Pulitzer Center back in 2018 in El Salvador came about because we had done a few other reporting projects in Central America and El Salvador with Univision, looking at different migration topics. And every time we reported on Central America, especially El Salvador, we realized gender issues were huge. I mean, at another level, right? You're talking about the most violent region in the world. El Salvador specifically has a crazy, crazy homicide rate. So within that context, even though femicide numbers are huge, you don't really see a lot of news coverage in El Salvador or even elsewhere about the brutal situation that women are facing in the country. And in one of those trips, we started hearing about women taking their own lives, and we thought, oh wow, like that would be interesting to pursue at another time for another story. And then, well, long story short, we found backing from Pulitzer Center. I can share more about how we did that later. But on the ground in El Salvador, we found a much bigger story than we even expected when we started reporting it, when we started pitching it to grants. It ended up being one of the most important stories of our lives. We found a tremendous situation. There was not a lot of official data that was updated, and we also found that the government didn't even count suicides of girls that were younger than 10 years old. We ended up interviewing and focusing on survivors. We interviewed a lot of women who had survived an attempt of suicide, and we interviewed several really young girls, one girl as young as 6 years old. So it was really shocking. We also learned about what the government was doing about it, how El Salvador has a really unique law that no other country in the world has, a legal figure called femicide suicide, by which it is a crime to force a woman through violence to die by suicide or to attempt suicide. So, but we also found that even though this amazing legal figure existed, it was not really leading to a lot of prosecutions. And when we were there were 60 cases of femicide suicide being investigated by the prosecution, but only one case was in court. Anyways, it was a fascinating story. We also, the woman that ended up being our main character in the story, both the print story, the multimedia, and the documentary, was a woman who was an adult by the time we met her, but she had tried to die by suicide at 15, had a brutal story of childhood, and actually, she ended up migrating and seeking asylum in the US. This happened after we left, 2 weeks after we left the last trip to El Salvador. She called us saying the gang members had just murdered her husband. And she, like many other people, made the trek to the US, and her asylum case is still pending. And we incorporated and visited her in the United States as well, which made a really nice connection with migration and not only gender issues. So I'm going to share a little clip, the first minute of the documentary that we produced, because it gives a little bit more of an overview of the story.
Please go ahead, Almudena. Thank you.
Let me see. Okay.
We're not getting sound, but we can see.
We don't hear any sound?
No, unfortunately.
Oh.
I see a microphone that we can try one more time. Otherwise, we're going to invite our audience. We're going to share, and my colleague Jackie Calderon from the Pulitzer Center is going to share the link in the chat.
Yeah.
And I encourage everyone to go ahead and after the session, watch the documentary, because it's really, really amazing and powerful work.
So something I can do instead is share, and they can share, our colleagues can share this link as well, just for a few seconds. Share a little preview without audio of the actual project that we published. It ended up being co-published with Time, the documentary, and it included graphics and photography and a short documentary, which is this one that you can watch later. And it was a big multimedia undertaking. So I welcome you to check it out later.
And this leads us nicely to the next question, Almudena. So you were working, and Patricia, at Univision at the time you did this story, but you decided to seek external support in order to pursue it. So can you tell us why you made that decision to go to the Pulitzer Center, and how did you go about it?
Yeah, we made the decision to seek support externally because even though we were staff journalists at a newsroom, and we were lucky enough that our newsroom paid for our reporting trips, migration is a huge issue for Univision, where we were working, but not necessarily gender issues. They don't drive a lot of traffic, or our editors didn't necessarily think, they believed in the story, they just didn't think that it was worth investing the many resources that were needed, because of course to do a story like this, you can't do that story in 5 days. I mean, you're talking to a lot of sensitive sources, it's very difficult to access. It was going to take at least weeks on the ground to do that story. So we really wanted to do it. So we actually, funny enough, we pitched the story first to another grant, not the Pulitzer Center. We pitched the story to the International Women Media Foundation through a grant that they had to go to El Salvador. And we were rejected from that grant. So actually, that was a really good time to reevaluate the research that we had. And I remember having a conversation with Patricia, my colleague. Patricia was like, oh, well, we were not lucky. And I was like, no, we're going to pitch it to somewhere else. And I know the other place that is perfect for this. So it took a little bit of persistence. We improved the pitch. We took some time to do more research and improve the pitch. And obviously the Pulitzer Center was a perfect place because of the strong focus in international reporting. We made sure that the Pulitzer Center had not funded anything that was similar to this. We looked at all of the reporting funded out of El Salvador, the gender issues reporting. And we sent the pitch without really hoping we would get it, but knowing we might not. I had applied for a Pulitzer grant in 2015, which is 3 years earlier, and I was rejected. So I didn't have a lot of hope, but we said, let's try, and we were accepted. So that's how we were able to do that important reporting.
And then I'm so glad you are telling these anecdotes. Some of these I didn't know. I only started working at the Pulitzer Center a year ago, but it's so important that we talk about rejection because it's something that sometimes paralyzes us. We have all experienced it. And I am so glad that you are sharing this story of how one rejection doesn't mean that the next time you try, you're going to be rejected. And we have to keep trying. We have all applied for fellowships and grants, have not been accepted, and then we have kept trying. So that is one important lesson. And also regrouping and thinking how I can refocus, how I can tailor the pitch more to this particular organization, being completely faithful to my original idea and knowing that I have complete editorial independence like you had in that case. So for other journalists who work for newsrooms and they want to pursue ambitious projects, and their newsrooms cannot afford to pay for the reporting costs, what advice do you have for them? How do they go about seeking that kind of support?
I would say that imagination and courage are really important. Like I remember, like it was yesterday when I told my colleague Patricia, we're going to apply to the Pulitzer Center. And she was like, oh, we're never going to get it. And I was like, we are going to do it. Because I think many people, especially in Latino media, right, you never think that your story is going to be accepted at a grant like the Pulitzer Center. It sounds incredible. It has the name Pulitzer. So obviously you never think your pitch is going to be good enough, but you have to try. Honestly, you have to try, and only trying you get somewhere. And also if you get rejected, it's not, in my opinion, it's not lost time, because you always learn from a pitch that was rejected, from a fellowship application that was rejected, and the next one will be better. So it's always gained experience. I would advise to do as much research as you can. Like we were saying, don't make the stupid mistake of pitching something that has been funded before, or pitching a story that has been done before. If it's a story that has been done before, pitch it to do it differently. What is new? What is different? What does the funder in this case get from your project? Try to see if you can pitch it. If you're, for example, working for a Latino media outlet, try to see if you can pitch it to do it in different mediums. Like if you can partner, pitch, like I'm gonna partner. I remember in our original pitch for this story, we said that we were going to try our hardest to publish digitally, which was our team, but also a broadcast story, and also partner with a radio outlet. So, and we had a list of outlets that we had in mind. We didn't have to show very specifically like, hey, we've talked to that editor in that radio, but we had a track record of having done some radio collaborations in the past. And that, I think, from the funder perspective, is also very attractive. Like, okay, this story is going to run in 2 languages, in 3 mediums, and what are the stories that these reporters have done before? They're going to look at basically what is your potential, but what is also your track record of being able to do impactful stories. And I don't think experience is necessarily only the main thing, in that, again, young reporters that don't have many clips can get these type of opportunities. And I'm sure that Muriel is going to talk more about that.
Exactly. And we're going to go right now to talk with Muriel about her reporting project. So Muriel, your story published in New York Magazine, and it focused on food deserts in New York City. We learned through that story that half of Latinos in New York City live in poverty, and they suffered from diabetes, hypertension, and other underlying conditions that are often the result or are linked to poor nutrition. So tell us a little bit what inspired you, how you got to that story, and what surprised you the most in the reporting process.
Yeah, well, first, thank you so much for this invitation. I feel so honored to be here today with you, Marina and Almudena. Thank you also the Latino Media Summit for having me today. So, right, I started to report this story during the first months of the pandemic. I was here in New York when the pandemic started. I was finishing my master's degree. And by then I didn't have a workplace. Like all I wanted to do was to be reporting. But only months later, I was going to start to work in a newsroom, which is the Columbia Journalism School Global Migration Project. But at that particular time, I was just a student graduating from a master with no clips. So by then, I saw that there was a type of stories that were not present in the American media outlets. The only stories about Latinos, in my opinion, were stories of precariousness, of disease, of overcrowded housing, of death. The Latino population was portrayed in media outlets, in my opinion, only through a single framing. Latinos were the big victims in the city. Of course, that is true. have all been hit by the pandemic. But I saw it on my social media and in my Latino neighborhood that there were extraordinary initiatives led by Latinos that were not reaching the media. So what inspired me to report my story was that in the face of this problem that you just mentioned, like that the half of Latinos in New York City live in poverty and suffer from diabetes and other conditions that are linked to poor nutrition and food desert, something that's, by the way, it's very well studied, and it is not something new, sadly. It is a sort of accepted reality in the United States. Facing that, there was this different groups of Latinos who were giving a solution to this problem. So the story I could work, thanks to the Pulitzer Center grant, is the story of how a group of Latino reacts and gives a creative solution during the pandemic to this chronic problem. My story is about how Latinas lead cooking classes on Facebook to teach Latino families how to eat well and show them that if they change the way they eat, if they cook and eat with healthier ingredients, their immune systems will be better prepared to face the virus. So, in fact, the project under which I have continued working in other stories is called the Food Revolution in Latino community in New York. I saw it as a food revolution. So when I reported this particular story, which was in May 2020, it was not possible to report on the ground. But I saw that there was a lot going on virtually. I mean, initiatives and interviews, and to report this, all you have to do was to have internet. And with this, I would like also to answer your second question, because like what surprised me during the reporting was to put attention to these stories. In magazine, podcasts, big media outlets that I follow daily from my lockdown, in that time from my dorm, the only framing that was used to talk about Latinos was that framing of victims, they as victims. And I decided to give a little bit of hope, shining a light on those stories that, while showing the problem, would also show the solution. Crisis, to me, also awakes humanity in multiple and diverse ways. And I wanted that to be my driving force in my work. And I also want to say regarding grants that I was also inspired by a recent experience that I had thanks to another grant, which I had won at the same time, or close to the same time, from the foundation, the Fundación Gabo, Fundación Gabriel García Márquez, that was particularly addressed to Latino journalists. And thanks to that grant, that gave me the chance at the same time to be reading and learning about solution journalism, this journalistic technique that aims to analyze response to problems. So it was difficult for me to understand it, because it is easy to get the impression that these are positive stories, and one as a journalist should always go beyond the surface. But solution journalism is much more complex than that. It is also an invitation to analyze the response that are being given to a specific social problem. So I attended these online cooking classes for a week. I pay attention to conversation that these community leaders were having there. I heard stories of people who were learning to eat healthier after taking these classes. I even had the chance to share a meal with the protagonist of my story, Ana Rodriguez, obviously taking all the measures because we were in the midst of the pandemic. But in my story, I wanted to show what my reporting allowed me to see. And this was that Latinos were also, in this city, in New York, agents of change. Again, it is not that they are not victims. Of course they are, we are. But we are also leading great initiatives, and the media needs to know that audience want to see themselves in those other framings as well. Ana Rodriguez had lost weight. She had learned that in her food choices, she could also protect her health. And she felt much stronger today to face the pandemic. So in my opinion, is today full of Ana Rodriguez, and as more as Ana Rodriguez reads the media, perhaps we can offer a little bit more of hope to those who have suffered from obesity and diabetes and continue to be portrayed in the media like a stick into the problem and not into the solution. That is what inspired my work today.
Amazing, Muriel. And also really nice that one grant led to another, led to a framework of how you could tackle this story. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of applying both for Gabo and for Pulitzer Center? And what you learned in that process that you can share with our colleagues here who are thinking about applying?
Yeah, sure. So first, the reason I wanted to apply for an external support to develop this boss story is because I was not working in media outlet at that time, at the beginning of the pandemic. I hadn't worked with an editor, any editor in the United States before. So I was just a student and I really wanted to be reporting. And also I would say that I was seeing stories everywhere, like sources sharing their personal stories without filter on social media. I even remember having pasted a paper on the wall of my dorm in which I wrote all these stories, and I had my thesis advisor. Like the meetings, the editorial meetings we had with my thesis advisor, Margaret Holloway, my professor in Columbia. She was obviously like editing my thesis, but at the same time edited this speech that I have because I was eager to be reporting. But now I want to also talk about rejections, because I thought that the way I could be reporting this story was to get in touch with editors, and that was this was what I did before the first. Like, I started writing editors, and when they didn't answer my emails, I wrote to them through social media. I attended Zoom. I left them a message everywhere, and they didn't answer me, and also there were some of them interest, and I even had some Zoom cafes with them. They when I sent them my pitch, they didn't respond me either. So I was frustrated at first, but then I didn't get discouraged, and I keep going. As Almudena said, I keep going. If there wasn't going to be a media outlet assigning me a story, I was going to make the story and then offer it. And that was when the Fundación Gabo and Pulitzer Center appeared, because I was not going to give up with the opportunity to be reporting here in this unique time, because journalism is my passion, and not reporting in a pandemic would have been contradictory to whom I am. Like, it would have been like being without sleep. Like, so.
Yeah. So instead of waiting for the editor to give you the assignment, you decided to take matters in your own hand and apply for support.
Absolutely, and also, well, the Pulitzer Center gave me the funding to report it, to spend time, and also a mentor. I was very lucky to work with the journalist Roger Through, and also to have the guidance of Kem Sawyer, Libby Moller, who are always organizing seminars, tax conference, and also a community that helps you to navigate in this world of pitch. You realize what type of phrases are more attractive to put in the subject of an email, what is the extension for a website story, like all these very practical tips that you just get from people, from journalists who are on the ground, who are dealing with these same uncertainties, questions, stuff all the time. So my particular experience with this particular story is that when I have like the idea, the materials, the interviews done, the information fact check, the story written, read by Roger, by Kim, I had the photos, I had one-page written pitch, which was also read by a friend, Liz Toroman, who has experience in magazine. When I had all these things, like I don't know how to say, like artilleria, like artillery, I went just in that moment to New York Magazine, and which seemed to me to be a place where my story could have a great impact. Like, despite being a very tourist story, it had a great impact. It's
why
like...
Yes, I was going to say, why don't we keep the impact a little bit for the next few minutes. I would like to remind people to send your questions, please. I also want to share a few tips before we start going to the Q&A. To share your questions, I want to share some tips. I'm going to see if this screen sharing works, and let me know if you are seeing my screen. Are you seeing my screen? Okay, let's see. Almudena and Muriel, can you tell me if you're seeing my screen?
Yes.
You are. Okay, good. Excellent. So I'm going to go ahead and very quickly before we go to the Q&A, share a few tips about our grant making process. So as we have been saying, the focus of the Pulitzer Center are underreported stories. And by that, we mean stories that point at the systemic causes of the crisis we face and that are often overlooked by the media because they are difficult to do, they are uncomfortable, or they are expensive. The topic, the angle is you decide, is what you choose. But there are certain reporting areas that I have included in this slide that we have supported in the past and the Pulitzer Center very much cares about, including migration, global health, racial justice, land rights, and more. So our grants are both for global and local enterprise stories. And we support freelancers, all kinds of freelancers, writers, photojournalists, filmmakers, but also newsrooms, like Almudena said. And to newsrooms, we ask them that they make the case as to why our support can make a difference between pursuing an important transformative project for that newsroom or not pursuing it. And then we also support college students. Our reporting fellows, like Muriel shared, get to work on an international story with mentorship and with a community of fellows. In our website, you will see a variety of grants available, and they are pretty self-explanatory, but if you get confused and you don't know where your story fits, our global reporting grants are kind of like the catch-all for all grants. And so just send your application through the global reporting grants and we'll be able to assign it to the grant that is the best fit for your story. So don't worry about that. Another good thing about our process, I think, is that our deadlines are rolling. That means that you don't need to remember a particular big date, and if you miss it, you have to wait a year. You can send your proposal anytime, and we will review it within a week, and we will get back to you very, very quickly with our response. Our grants typically cover the costs of reporting the story. So all the expenses associated with you being able to tell that story in the best possible way. Travel and lodging, FOIA costs, data, visualizations, software. We can talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A. We look for solid and strategic distribution plans, multi-platform, multi-language. We love to see that, as well as collaboration, data, and innovative approaches both in the reporting and in the storytelling. When our editors get together every Wednesday morning to review the proposals that we have received the previous days, we ask ourselves 3 questions. Those meetings are fun and are intense, as you can imagine. It's hard to say no, so you can say yes to the best possible projects. But we ask these questions to guide our decisions. Is this an underreported systemic issue of global concern, or is it of local concern but connected to a global theme? Is this story likely to get traction or deliver a new strategic audience? That's the second question we ask ourselves, and that is directly connected to our mission. We want these stories to raise awareness, and for that, they have to be visible. They have to trigger something. They have to spark conversation. We try to avoid situations, for example, of preaching to the choir, and that's why we focus so much in the distribution plans. And then the final question we ask ourselves is, who's telling the story? And in this question, as you imagine, is when we think about issues of representation, issues of belonging. We look at the ties that the reporter has to a particular community, but also the expertise and the track record delivering this kind of projects as proposed in the pitch. So before I finish, just some very quick do's and don'ts that can be handy to remember as you are preparing your proposal for the Pulitzer Center or for any other funder. Tell us why the story matters. You know, what editors say, like the so what of the story and how your approach is going to be different or unique. Please remember to brag a little bit about yourself. It's perfectly fine to brag and to tell us how, you know, what is your strong work in this area and how your expertise or your special access are going to make a difference in this story. And then finally, emphasize distribution. What we ask is, like, if you are already in conversations with editors, that you tell us that in the application. And if you can include a letter of interest or commitment from editors, that is even better. That gives us, helps us really understand the scope and the reach of your story. Don'ts, that is also important to remember. Don't overlook feasibility. So especially now that there are still many restrictions in place due to COVID, important to think about you know, a reasonable timeline, what can really be done, where we can travel safely, and to put forward a really clear reporting plan. Don't forget to check our website, like Almudena said, to see what we have supported already, what stories have been done on the area that you're interested in and how yours will be different. And then finally, money, right? Don't miss a detailed budget. Include all the items that are going to be needed to really support the kind of story that you are going to do. Including in the budget during a pandemic is protection equipment for you and for your team, testing, and so on. Once the project gets approved, this is our commitment to you. Our commitment is basically to champion you all the way through and your story through open and frequent communication, always respecting your editorial independence, as all funders should always do, and trying every time we can to connect you to resources and to the vibrant Pulitzer Center network. We don't talk enough about the community, like Muriel mentioned, that we find when we become fellows or grantees of these organizations. And it's one of the most enriching aspects, I think, of getting the support. We also connect you to our K-12 and university and outreach programs. It's a very special side of the Pulitzer Center. We believe that to raise awareness about the stories you're writing about, the best way is to bring you and your story to classrooms around the world. And now in the virtual reality, that is much easier to do. So please visit our website at pulitzercenter.org. You will see our page with all the reporting grants and fellowships, and also a video here. You have an image of that video that is 10 minutes of tips, some of what I have said now and other tips that I haven't had time to mention. And of course, the Pulitzer Center is part of a larger ecosystem of funders. International Women's Media Foundation was mentioned here, the Gabo Foundation, but there are others. And so do a little bit of research. Here are some of those funders. There are plenty of us out there that are really eager to hear from you and start supporting you. So I am going to stop sharing. There we go. And I would love now to go and answer some of your questions. So please keep them coming. I'm going to check here and we have a question from Chantal Flores. Many grants are for underreported stories, but often it seems that media outlets are not ready for those angles and perspectives that we reporters are seeing on the ground, especially when it comes to international reporting. What's the best way to place those stories? I am a Mexican freelance reporter, often dealing with American editors. Almudena, do you want to give it a try to this question?
Sure. I think it's a really great question, Chantal, because you are so right. I mean, in my time as a freelancer, I could see this some years ago, and we've all seen the coverage, for example, of Latin America, of the main news outlets in the US, and sometimes to say the truth, is very deficient, and it's very frustrating for good freelancers on the ground who live in country to see how a certain story will run if it's done by a correspondent, an American that is in Mexico, for example, rather than, you know, the person that is reporting day in and day out there. So I think it's a brilliant question. I would say this is the European in me. I'm from Spain. I would say that besides brainstorming about how to get to the New York Times or the Washington Post these stories, that is a little bit hard sometimes. I would say that in the past, I had really good experiences trying to pitch international stories in other regions, like Australia and Europe. There are certain news outlets, for example, The Guardian in the UK and some other places in the UK or Europe, that I feel like their interest or their appetite for news about Latin America is a little bit more progressive, or it might fit better outside of the stereotypes that sometimes you see in the US. And also in the US is always very tricky, because you realize, for example, this has changed to a certain degree, but you see that the biggest newspapers, I mean, the amount of coverage of the Middle East in the US is incredible compared to the amount of coverage of Latin America. So I don't know. I think the established relationship with editors is always the best path. If not that, which I'm sure you have, if you have any other way of finding partnerships to pitch that story, sometimes you don't want to partner with the correspondent from that country, but maybe there are other ways of partnering with someone else that might bring your credibility even higher, so they actually listen to this new angle that you're proposing. And a lot of persistence, and one person only is not going to change the system. But I think it's a matter of trying, and also if that doesn't work, looking to pitching in other countries as well.
Muriel, when you pitched to a New York magazine, so you told me that before you had gotten some rejections or just no answer, but when you pitched to New York magazine, was that a cold pitch, or do you know someone? How do you go about it? Why did that work? And you're muted still.
So I was also thinking of the question that Almudena has just answered, and in a certain way it is related with why I think I could put this story, which was kind of weird, if you want. Like, I mean, it was not the typical story that you can find there, and I think it is because my I aim, obviously, probably I am. I want not to sound like too como autorreferente, but what I want to say is that probably the thing that I guess this question maybe can be better answered by the editor, but it tells like a universal story, which is how community in general deals with some disease that are linked to other things, like how everything is connected. And I guess it was not only like a Latino story, but a community story that could also portray other communities. Once I remember being asked by a friend why I was so like passionate about Latino communities in New York. And I am sure I would be very passionate about every single community, but because I am Latina, I probably understand it's like the Latino community better because of like practical things. I understand Spanish with an accent. I know the ways of speaking and relating that are different from those of other communities. I love also that when they see me because of my accent, and I guess identify me as a Latina, and probably that's also explain how I could have like a specific access to, I don't know, in particular in my story, Ana Rodriguez's house. Like, she felt the confidence to share, to open the fridge to me and share that meal with me. So, I mean, I don't want to say that you have to be Latino to be covering Latino communities, or you have to be Asian to be. I guess you have to have the curiosity, the surprise, and the aim to tell a good story. But I guess what could bring my story and the reason that maybe was fit with that, it was telling a universal story, a story that belonged to all of us, not only to Latinos.
Thank you, Muriel. So we have a question from Cesar Leonardo Rojas, and it is there any support for international graduate students in the US? And that's exactly what Muriel was when we supported you. So yes, the answer is that we support students and we support professional journalists, and the Pulitzer Center has agreements with certain universities, but we can support you regardless of any agreements. Those agreements is our Campus Consortium, which is a really nice program that allows you to have that community of fellows and also a mentor. But if you are an international student in the US, you are a journalist, you have a great story and an idea for a distribution plan, please feel free to pitch to us. Almudena, let's talk a little bit about budgets and how we present these to funders when we seek support. Documentaries, in your case, are expensive. So what advice do you have to other filmmakers or other journalists who are thinking about short docs, for example, and seeking support? How do they go about their budgets to make sure they are accurate, realistic, and they get paid?
Yeah, I think doing an accurate budget for international reporting is always such a big challenge for any reporter, because there's always costs that you can't predict, right? You're on the ground and there's a particular safety situation and you have to pay an extra hotel that you didn't expect or budget for. I always advise in general to budget a little bit over if you can. Like, I remember when we did our application, we made an accurate representation of all the costs, like the flights. We looked, okay, flights, US San Salvador, X, Y, Z, hotel, whatever. We looked at all the costs, and then we tried to not, of course, balloon a lot, but a little bit, because that gives you a little bit of flexibility for any unexpected costs. And for short documentary, I think it's really important to keep in mind costs that you might not be even like expecting or thinking about. Like, do you need to rent? Is it better for you to rent the equipment or use your own equipment? There are all the safety considerations, like insurance, for example. That's something we thought about when going to El Salvador. It's pretty dangerous. What about if they steal my gear? We decided to take our gear, my gear, but you have to think about that. Do you want to budget for insurance? Do you want to budget for rental of equipment? If, for example, you're working with a fixer, like we did, we asked around, we did the research and asked around to some Salvadoran acquaintances, like, okay, how much could these be for, 3 weeks or 2 weeks, or to get an idea. We didn't have the person hired because we didn't have the grant, but we at least had opinions of how much could that be. Same with like a car or a driver. In our case, for example, it was in certain areas of El Salvador is not really safe, so we didn't want to rent a car. We wanted to work with somebody who had their own car and knew San Salvador and El Salvador. So that's another cost that if we had not put, it would have been a loss on our budget, basically. And if you can budget also, or think about even distribution costs, that's something that for ambitious documentaries can, of course, be a lot of help, like festival submissions, or there's a sort of, I think it's very worth spending the time on really doing the research about the costs, and doing the research of the costs in the country, so then you don't see yourself in this situation of running out of funds. Also, for filmmakers specifically, obviously, many films are funded through several grants. So it's okay to budget for one part of the production and then obviously then apply for other grants to continue the production. And I think funders are more open to that these days.
Yes, and we like and we ask that people tell us when they apply who else they're talking to. It's good to know, like, okay, what's the overall budget, how much we're asking from this funder, and where else we are trying to seek support. Another thing that you mentioned, important, insurance. At the Pulitzer Center, we do buy health insurance for our reporters when they are in the field, and it's part of the support that we give them. Now, there's a question that I always get asked, and I think it's good to bring it up, which is freelancers ask, should I still expect outlets to pay me if I received a reporting grant? And the answer is a big yes. Absolutely, sí, de todas maneras. It's the fact that you have a reporting grant doesn't mean that the Pulitzer Center is taking the responsibility away from outlets to pay freelancers for their work. And so what you have to explain to those outlets is that they are fortunate that you have been able to receive a reporting grant that would cover your expenses, the cost of doing the project, but it likely will not cover your own time. So outlets are still responsible to pay for the fees for your time. So please remember that. Another question that I often get is what is the range value in our grants, just to have an idea. And what I say is, like, our grants, they vary, but anything between 3,000 and 15,000 is realistic, and depending on the project, depending on the situation, depending whether like travel is involved. But that is kind of like a general range. We have done bigger grants for very ambitious projects, and they have been absolutely worth it. And then the other question is, if I get rejected, should I apply again? And I think we have responded that in this session, absolutely, because most likely it's not about you, definitely not about you, and probably definitely not about your project. Sometimes funders have different priorities, or we just have supported in the last month 3 stories in the similar area or in the similar region as your story. So don't assume that there's nothing particularly wrong with your project, and please always continue applying. We are at the time. I can't believe that it's already time to leave. I'm sad. But I want to thank Almudena and Muriel and everyone who attended this session for being with us today. I hope that you have found the information useful. I hope that you feel more confident about applying for a reporting grant. Please note that we are here to answer questions. We're going to be staying in the networking area. I am going to be attending throughout the 3 days, so you can find me and ask me any questions that you may have. The next session sounds amazing, and it has to do with mapping Latinidad through music, so make sure that you don't miss that session. Thank you so much again to CUNY, to the Latino Media Summit, and to Muriel and Almudena for their incredible work, their reporting, but also their generosity of spirit for being here today and sharing what they learned as through trial, error, and success.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Gracias a todos, y gracias a Jackie Calderón, my colleague at the Pulitzer Center, who has been steadily sharing links and useful information in the chat.